Ladies and gentlemen, imagine living inside an anime world where giants walk the earth, walls separate humanity from extinction, and every battle decides the fate of civilization. Now imagine fighting in that world, while fighting an even darker battle inside your own mind. That is the psychological tragedy of Reiner Braun from Attack on Titan. Reiner's dual identity conflict is the psychological core of his entire character. At its surface, it may look like simple deception, a spy pretending to be a loyal soldier while secretly serving another nation. But what makes his struggle far more disturbing is that over time, the lie stops feeling like a lie. The role he was assigned begins to reshape who he actually is. As a child raised in Marley, Reiner was conditioned to believe in a single truth: the people inside the walls were enemies who needed to be destroyed. He was taught that becoming a warrior was an honor, a path to redemption for himself and his family. That belief became his purpose. It gave him direction. It gave him value. When he inherited the power of the armored titan, he didn't just gain strength, he gained identity. But everything began to change the moment he crossed into enemy territory. Living among the people inside the walls forced Reiner to confront a reality that did not match the propaganda he had grown up with. The devils he expected to hate were human. They laughed during training. They complained about chores. They argued, dreamed, and feared death just like he did. The longer he stayed, the more impossible it became to separate mission from emotion. This is where the true conflict begins. Reiner doesn't just pretend to be a soldier, he becomes one. He bonds with his comrades. He protects them in battle. He encourages them when they doubt themselves. He risks his life beside them. These actions are not calculated manipulations every time. They are genuine reactions formed through shared struggle. Slowly, the role of soldier starts embedding itself into his sense of self. At the same time, his original identity as a warrior of Marley does not disappear. It remains rooted in duty, expectation, and the desperate need to prove his worth. That part of him still believes in the mission. It still carries the responsibility of completing it. It still hears the voices of his homeland reminding him that failure is not an option. So now he carries two truths at once. He is both protector and destroyer, comrade and enemy, hero and infiltrator. The human mind is not designed to hold such opposing identities without consequence. When someone is forced to live in contradiction long enough, the tension begins to fracture their perception of reality. For Reiner, switching between these roles is not like changing masks, it becomes an internal division. There are moments when he speaks and acts entirely as a loyal soldier, fully immersed in that reality. Then there are moments when the warrior identity resurfaces with cold determination. The terrifying part is that neither side feels completely fake. His loyalty to Marley is real because it was built through childhood conditioning and emotional manipulation. His loyalty to his friends inside the walls is also real because it was built through shared suffering and genuine connection. Both identities carry emotional weight. Both demand obedience. This creates a constant psychological tug of war. When he fights alongside his comrades, he feels belonging. When he remembers his mission, he feels obligation. Each identity threatens the existence of the other. To fully embrace one would mean betraying the other, and in doing so, betraying a part of himself. Over time, this unresolved tension erodes his stability. The boundaries between his two roles blur. He struggles to determine which version of himself is authentic. Is he the proud warrior completing a righteous mission, or the loyal soldier protecting humanity? The answer becomes painfully unclear. His dual identity conflict is not simply about espionage. It is about the collapse of a unified self. It shows what happens when ideology and lived experience collide. When propaganda meets humanity. When a child raised to hate is forced to love the very people he was meant to destroy. Reiner's tragedy is that he does not get to choose one identity without losing the other. He is trapped between them, forced to carry both, even as they tear him apart from the inside. Reiner's psychological breakdown does not happen in one explosive moment. It unfolds slowly, almost quietly, as if his mind is trying to endure more than it was ever designed to handle. At first, he appears stable, focused, mission-driven. He knows why he is inside the walls. He knows what he is supposed to accomplish. That clarity gives him structure. But clarity becomes fragile when reality refuses to align with belief. The longer Reiner lives among the people he was taught to hate, the more strain builds inside him. He forms friendships that feel real. He fights alongside comrades who trust him completely. He experiences fear, exhaustion, and relief with them. These shared emotions begin to anchor him to a second truth, one that contradicts everything he was raised to believe. This contradiction creates unbearable psychological pressure. To function, Reiner cannot constantly question his mission. If he fully absorbs the emotional consequences of his actions while still needing to carry them out, he would collapse instantly. So his mind begins to compartmentalize. Instead of integrating both identities into one coherent self, he unconsciously separates them. This is where dissociation begins to take shape. There are moments when Reiner speaks and behaves entirely as a loyal soldier of the walls. His tone shifts, his body language softens, his sense of belonging appears authentic. He strategizes as if the survival of humanity inside the walls is his personal responsibility. In those moments, he is not pretending. He believes it, he lives inside that version of himself completely. Then, in other moments, the warrior identity surfaces. His voice becomes firm, mission-focused, emotionally distant. He recalls his homeland. He speaks about objectives, outcomes, and necessary sacrifice. It feels as though a switch has flipped, but it is not a conscious performance. It is a survival mechanism. The human brain can only tolerate extreme cognitive dissonance for so long before it seeks protection. For Reiner, that protection comes in the form of psychological fragmentation. By separating his identities, he avoids experiencing the full weight of guilt in real time. Each side carries part of the burden, preventing total emotional overload. But fragmentation is not stability. It is temporary containment. As the years pass and the consequences of his actions multiply, the cracks become visible. His transitions between identities grow less controlled. He sometimes responds as if he genuinely belongs to the walls, only to abruptly revert to his warrior mindset. These shifts are disorienting, not just for those around him, but for himself. The line between role and reality blurs. Exhaustion becomes constant, not just physical fatigue from battle, but mental depletion from maintaining incompatible versions of himself. His eyes lose their intensity. His posture becomes heavier. There is a visible weariness in his expression, as if he is carrying invisible weight on his shoulders every second of the day. Guilt intensifies the breakdown. He remembers faces, conversations, trust. He recalls the chaos and destruction that followed his actions. Every fallen comrade deepens the fracture. Yet he cannot undo what has been done. The mission continues. Expectations remain. There is no pause button for psychological recovery in the middle of war. This trapped state accelerates his deterioration. He begins questioning his own worth. His sense of identity becomes unstable. If he is both hero and villain, then who is he really? If he believes two conflicting truths, which one defines him? Without a stable answer, his foundation weakens. What makes his breakdown so devastating is its realism. He does not snap into madness. He unravels gradually. The strong, reliable presence slowly reveals confusion, despair, and self-doubt beneath the surface. His mind did not fracture because he was weak. It fractured because it was overloaded. Reiner's dissociation is not theatrical, it is protective. His psyche divides to keep him functioning in a world where no choice is clean and no action is free of consequence. But the cost of that protection is a fragmented sense of self, leaving him unsure where the soldier ends and the warrior begins. Guilt is the emotional weight that defines Reiner more than armor ever could. Long before the world sees him as a powerful warrior, he is already carrying something heavier: expectation, indoctrination, and the desperate need to be worthy. He grows up in a system that teaches him a single narrative, that becoming a warrior is the only path to honor, acceptance, and salvation for his family. His sense of value becomes tied to usefulness. If he succeeds, he earns love. If he fails, he confirms every doubt ever placed on him. War, for Reiner, does not begin on the battlefield. It begins in childhood conditioning. He is told that the people inside the walls are devils, that their destruction is justice, that suffering inflicted upon them is not cruelty but duty. When you are raised in an environment where morality is dictated by authority, questioning becomes dangerous. So Reiner doesn't question, he commits. He pushes himself beyond his limits to prove he deserves the title of warrior. But the reality of war is nothing like the clean narrative he was fed. The moment destruction becomes personal, when buildings fall, when civilians scream, when comrades die, war stops being an abstract mission and becomes a lived trauma. Reiner witnesses the direct consequences of his actions. He sees fear in the eyes of people who look nothing like monsters. He hears the voices of children who sound like the children he once trained beside. The ideological shield that once protected his conscience begins to crack. This is where guilt is born. At first, it is subtle. A brief hesitation, a flicker of doubt, but guilt does not stay small when it is ignored. It grows. Every lost life adds to the weight. Every friend who trusted him deepens the wound. The more bonds he forms inside the walls, the harder it becomes to justify the destruction he caused. What makes his guilt especially powerful is that it is layered. He feels guilt toward the people he betrayed inside the walls. He also feels guilt toward his homeland for not being strong enough, not being decisive enough, not fulfilling the mission cleanly. He feels guilt for surviving when others did not. And beneath all of that, he carries guilt for simply being who he is, a child shaped by a system he did not choose. War strips away the illusion of simple morality. It forces individuals to confront the consequences of actions that once felt righteous. For Reiner, the realization that both sides are human is psychologically devastating. If the enemy is human, then what does that make him? Protector, invader, victim, villain. He cannot escape accountability. Even if he was indoctrinated, even if he was manipulated, he still participated. He still broke the walls. He still watched lives crumble. That awareness transforms guilt into something heavier, self-condemnation. Over time, his guilt shifts from regret over actions to doubt about existence. He begins questioning whether he deserves to live, whether his survival is justified, whether the world would be better without him. This is not dramatic exaggeration, it is the natural result of prolonged moral injury. When someone's actions conflict deeply with their internal sense of right and wrong, the damage is not just emotional, it is existential. And yet, his guilt also reveals something profound: empathy. The fact that he suffers under the weight of what he has done shows that he is not empty or cruel. He is deeply aware, deeply human. War tried to reduce him to a weapon, but guilt proves that he is still capable of moral reflection. The pain he carries is evidence that he understands the cost of violence. Reiner's guilt is not a single moment of remorse. It is a constant presence, a silent companion in every battle, a reminder that war does not only destroy cities, it fractures souls. And in his case, it becomes the emotional burden that shapes every decision he makes moving forward. Redemption for Reiner does not arrive as a heroic speech or a dramatic victory. It begins quietly, in moments where he is forced to confront himself without excuses. After years of living between identities, after carrying guilt that feels unbearable, he reaches a point where denial is no longer possible. He can no longer blame only indoctrination, only orders, or only circumstance. He must face the truth of what he has done, and who he has become. Self-awareness is the first step. For most of his journey, Reiner survives by fragmenting himself. One side takes responsibility for duty, the other absorbs emotional attachment. But redemption cannot grow in fragmentation. It requires integration. It requires acknowledging that both the warrior and the soldier are real parts of him. Neither can be erased, neither can be fully justified. This realization is painful because it removes the comfort of extremes. If he were purely a villain, then cruelty would be simple. If he were purely a hero, forgiveness would be easy. But existing in the gray area demands maturity. It demands ownership. Reiner begins to understand that while he was shaped by propaganda and expectation, he still made choices. Some were driven by fear, some by pride, some by desperation to prove himself. Accepting that complexity is the beginning of growth. Instead of running from his guilt, he starts carrying it consciously. Redemption for him is not about undoing the past. That is impossible. The walls cannot be unbroken. The lives lost cannot return. Redemption instead becomes about responsibility in the present. It is about asking, what can I do now, knowing everything I know? This shift changes his posture toward the world. Earlier, his actions were driven by proving his worth. Later, they are driven by protecting others from repeating his mistakes. There is a difference between fighting to be seen as valuable and fighting because you understand the cost of violence. He becomes more reflective, more restrained. The reckless desire to fulfill expectations is replaced by a heavy awareness of consequence. When he steps into battle again, it is no longer with blind certainty. It is with understanding that every action echoes beyond the moment. Self-awareness also forces him to see others clearly. He recognizes that the people he once labeled as enemies were victims of their own narratives, just as he was. This recognition softens him, not into weakness, but into empathy. He understands how easy it is for children to be molded into weapons. How easy it is for hatred to be inherited rather than chosen. That empathy becomes part of his redemption. True redemption is not about being forgiven by everyone. It is about choosing to act differently even when forgiveness is uncertain. Reiner cannot control how others view him. Some will always see him as the destroyer of their home. Some will never separate his actions from his identity. But self-awareness teaches him that redemption is internal before it is external. He stops seeking validation as proof of worth. Instead, he seeks accountability. He accepts that living means continuing to face what he has done. There is courage in that choice. It is easier to collapse under guilt. It is harder to wake up every day and keep trying to be better. His redemption is not clean or triumphant. It is complicated, ongoing, and deeply human. It shows that growth does not erase trauma but reshapes how one carries it. Reiner's journey suggests that even those who have caused immense harm are capable of change, if they are willing to confront themselves honestly. His story reminds us that redemption is not about becoming flawless. It is about choosing responsibility over denial, awareness over ignorance, and humanity over hatred, even when the weight of the past never fully disappears. Reiner Braun's psychological journey is not just the story of a warrior in armor. It is the story of a human being crushed between ideology and empathy, duty and friendship, guilt and survival. His mind becomes the true battlefield, long before any physical war reaches its peak. Through dual identity, psychological fragmentation, overwhelming guilt, and painful self-awareness, we witness what happens when a child shaped by propaganda grows into a man forced to confront reality. What makes his character so powerful is not his strength, but his vulnerability. He shows us that war does not simply create heroes and villains, it creates trauma. It divides identities. It plants guilt deep into the conscience of those who were once too young to choose. Reiner represents the cost of blind loyalty and the devastating consequences of inherited hatred. Yet he also represents something equally important, the possibility of growth. His redemption is not loud. It is not perfect. It does not erase the past. Instead, it reflects a mature understanding that accountability matters more than image, and responsibility matters more than pride. By facing his mistakes instead of hiding from them, he proves that even a broken warrior can move forward with awareness. In the end, Reiner's story teaches us that the heaviest armor a person can wear is not made of steel, it is made of guilt, memory, and identity. And true strength is not the power to destroy, but the courage to confront who you really are. Because sometimes, the greatest battle is not against the world, but against the person you see in the mirror.